When big life changes happen, people always imagine the dramatic moment, the heartfelt speech, the emotional reaction, the music swelling in the background. But most of the time, real life isn't like that. Most of the time, it's confusion, bad timing, and at least one person completely misunderstanding what's going on.
Why is this happening? You're too young and beautiful to die.
What? I'm not dying. I'm going to San Francisco.
Wait, what?
This episode of the Mindy Project is basically the fallout from one very big moment, Danny finding out that Mindy is pregnant. And instead of slowing down and letting that moment breathe, the show does what it usually does best. It turns the aftermath into absolute chaos. You've got Danny trying to figure out what being a father means, Mindy trying to figure out what being a business owner means, Jeremy thinking Danny is dying, and Morgan somehow making things even worse. The show is quietly answering one of the bigger questions it's been building to all season. What's actually going to happen with Mindy in San Francisco? Because for the first time in a while, this episode feels like the show actually knows where it's going again. So with that in mind, welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking the 16th episode of the third season of the Mindy Project titled Lahiri Family Values. Written by Tracy Wigfield and directed by Marco Fargnoli. So let's find out how this one stacked up, starting with the episode overview. Now, right off the bat, I have to say, this is the kind of Mindy Project episode that I can get behind. The last few have been stinkers, but this one felt like a back on track type of episode. There were definitely still some areas that didn't feel up to snuff, but by the end of the episode, I was feeling good about the show again. And we start this episode with the Mindy voiceover picking up right where we left off in the hospital break room where Danny had just told Mindy that they're a family now. And in the voiceover, Mindy's talking about the perfect proposal that girls dream about when they're young. And what Danny does is not that dream. In typical Danny fashion, he's gonna jump up and say, let's get up and get our shame wedding done right away. In 7 months, we can have the baby. We'll say, wow, it's an 11-pound preemie and we'll be good with God. But obviously, Mindy doesn't want that kind of proposal. She wants a proposal from love, or at a minimum, for ratings for their reality show. But there's still an underlying issue here. Mindy is still planning on opening a fertility clinic in San Francisco, and Danny still lives and works in New York. So how does that play out? They have a long-distance marriage? But Danny's gonna smooth out that issue. First, he's gonna try to convince Mindy to stay and work in the practice until she has the baby, and then she can just stay home making sauce. So obviously that's a no, but his second idea hits better. He's gonna move to San Francisco. Also, interestingly, we get a Rishi mention here, which is Mindy's brother, so we know he's coming back in this episode at some point. But Danny thinks the hard part is gonna be telling Jeremy. I mean, he's really leaving Jeremy in a lurch if he leaves for San Francisco. And Mindy's like, it'll be fine, just tell him I'm pregnant. But Danny's like, he does not like this idea. He insists they have to wait for the second trimester, and then Mindy's like, but that's so long from now. What if I forget? And after that, they're saying their goodbyes, and Danny is going to say goodbye directly to Mindy's belly. And when he does so, he calls the baby a boy. And Mindy's like, I don't know, I think it might be a girl. But Danny claims it's definitely a boy because he can hear his penis. And it's big. But we're going to head to the office now and follow Danny. Danny gets on the elevator and tells Jeremy that he's got something important to tell him, but then Cliff, Glenn Howerton's back. He gets on the elevator with them, so they can't really have that conversation. So it's fun to see Glenn Howerton back, but he's actually going to play an important role this episode. He's going to stop the conversation between Jeremy and Danny, which means that Danny can't tell him about the move to San Fran. But on top of that, he's going to tell him that he's moving to a new office because his divorce law practice is really kicking into high gear ever since the gay marriages are starting to get divorced now. And this is going to set Jeremy off about everybody moving on to bigger and better things. Peter and Lauren moving to Austin, Mindy moving to San Fran, Cliff getting a new office. You know what the real brave thing to do is? Stay put. So of course now Danny feels like he can't tell Jeremy, but there was still the matter of the important topic that he needed to bring up with Jeremy. So Jeremy's like, what was the important thing you wanted to talk about? And Danny's like, did you want my watch? And Jeremy's like, yes, please. So Danny's like, son of a bitch, and just ends up giving him the watch reluctantly. It's a good bit. And when Danny heads into the office, he's going to go to the break room. He's going to see Morgan in there reading an issue of Zoo Life magazine that's all about like animal dads. And he asks if he can have it. And it looks like Morgan might be on to what's going on. But we're not going to stay with him long enough to see if he's figured it out. We're going to head back over to San Fran. What are we going to do there? Well, Mindy and Gurgler are going to be getting denied a small business loan because of Mindy's bad credit. Now, Mindy's going to act shocked here, like, excuse me, I've got great credit, blah, blah, blah. But we had an episode earlier this season where Mindy acknowledges that her credit is so bad that she can't even get store credit cards. So I'm not sure where this newfound confidence in her credit rating is coming from. Be that as it may, we're going to find out that her bad credit rating is coming from Rishi, because he is defaulting on an apartment on which Mindy is the guarantor. During this scene, because Gurgler is there, it means we're going to get some more Gurgler. And for those of you who have been watching weeks of Mindy Project here, you know, I don't really enjoy this character. He's going to talk about how big of a coward he is, that he doesn't want to take on the financial responsibility by himself. Then Mindy's going to convince him. And that happens really quickly. She's just like, no, you should do it. And he's like, okay. He literally calls himself a giant coward. And Mindy's like, no, you should do this business with me. I think it's a good idea for me to work with you. Why do you want to open a practice with this guy, Mindy? Makes no sense. But when we come back to New York, Danny is amending his will and Morgan overhears it. Of course, he's amending the will to get Mindy in it. And I really thought that we were going to see Morgan figure it out. Instead, he's going to think that Danny is dying, which is going to set up a fun little bit of miscommunication jokes for most of the rest of this episode. So Morgan's going to bring everybody else into the room and tell them all that Dr. C is dying. Naturally, Jeremy is like, no, he's not. But Beverly says, which one's Dr. C? So we're going to cut back over to Mindy and she's going to call Cliff. Why? Because she wants legal advice about the whole credit rating situation. And it's funny because Cliff answers the phone like, Mindy? I'm surprised you'd be calling me. And there's like a split-second pause there where you're like, are they going to make him not over her still? But then that ends pretty quickly because he says, I thought I blocked your number. And then he's like, I don't have time for this. I'm moving offices. I got to go. And she's like, oh, wow, you're moving? Where are you going to? And he's like, it's interesting, and then just hangs up on her. But Mindy was on her way to see Rishi. And when she gets there, there's like a whole bunch of eviction notices on his door. He's not doing well. He's been out of work. He can't pay his bills. And he's ducking his landlord because according to him, California's got mad squatters' rights. And as long as the landlord doesn't catch him outside of the apartment, it's fine. But Mindy's got an idea. Rishi's got a degree from Stanford in biology. He could work as a med tech at her new practice. Perfect. He just needs to interview with Gurgler. So yay for us, we get more Gurgler. And the interview seems like it's going fairly well. Right up until he says he doesn't know his reference's real name. He just goes by Big Murder. And then, on top of that, he's like, I gotta go handle some business, and he goes outside and sells drugs. But it's not a big deal. He's barely a drug dealer. He just sells weed and everything else. Mindy's gonna threaten to call their parents, and Rishi is gonna threaten right back. And amazingly, apparently, being pregnant is worse than being a drug dealer. But one thing about the scene I really enjoyed was Mindy going on a mini rant about how marijuana is the worst because it just makes you fat and lazy. I mean, at least cocaine has an industrious spirit. I really like that. But back to New York, and Jeremy is misunderstanding what's going on. He thinks Danny is dying, and Danny thinks Jeremy knows that he's going to San Francisco. And this type of bit just always works for me. For instance, Danny says he's gonna miss New York style pizza. And Jeremy's gonna respond that, they might have it there, as in heaven. Then Danny responds, nah, it's all Chinese food and tacos. Or when Danny says he'll come back and visit, and Jeremy's like, yeah, I have an Aunt Imogen who does that. She visits me to warn me about things. And then there's a beat, and Danny's just like, cool. But the big question is, what did Mindy say? Now, of course, Jeremy thinks that he's asking this question about what did she say when she found out that Danny is dying, to which Danny is going to reply, she was thrilled. She said it was the best present he ever gave her. And Jeremy's going to be like, what a monster. Danny says, she's okay, and just moves on. It's the simple things for me. All right, so back to San Francisco. Mindy is trying to force Rishi to quit being a drug dealer. But Rishi comes back and he's like, Big Murder wouldn't let me quit. So naturally, pregnant Mindy is going to go in and tell off a drug kingpin named Big Murder. And as it turns out, Big Murder is played by John Cho. What happened is he actually offered Rishi a 20% raise and Rishi took it. And in Rishi's defense, he's good at the work. Plus, he's not really cut out for the workforce. I mean, he called Silicon Valley and asked for a job and they offered him an HR position. And he was like, what even is that? But the scene plays out with a fun bit where Big Murder, or Greg, offers Mindy a 7-figure salary to write fake prescriptions for him. And Mindy's like, okay, I'm in. Oh, wait, you almost got me. But back at the office in New York, the team there is holding a tribute to Danny. And this, of course, is where it's going to come out that he's not dying, he's just moving. Morgan is just nuts. He says that Danny straight up told him that he's dying and that Danny wanted him to take care of Mindy. And when he said take care of, he meant sexually after he was gone. And of course, Danny's like, I didn't say anything like that. But the best part to me is that Tamara pipes up and says, why would Morgan lie about that? I actually feel like that's a microcosm of the internet, really. Like someone on the internet just says some outlandish shit, and then there are a bunch of people who believe it because they say, well, why would they lie about it? But anyway, everyone's backlash against Danny moving to San Francisco is going to convince him to tell them that Mindy's pregnant, so he breaks his own rule. Of course, everyone changes their tune immediately and they're all happy for him. So now that everyone's on board with Danny moving to San Francisco to be with Mindy and his unborn child, wouldn't you know it, Mindy's going to end up having second thoughts about opening a practice with Gurgler. Now, this all comes to a head because Gurgler is against hiring Rishi, and he's saying that, they're not running a Wahlburger. They can't just hire family because it's family. And Mindy realizes that Mark and Donnie Wahlberg were onto something. It is about family, second chances, and juicy hamburgers. So she quits the practice before it ever opens and leaves Gurgler calling out, Mark and Donnie are never onto something. So now Danny is leaving New York, but Mindy is going back. But weirdly, still in San Francisco, Mindy is lamenting that this was her only chance to open a fertility clinic. But at least Rishi and Nipa are there to correct her. They're like, why would you need this random white guy? As far as entitlement and personality, Rishi thinks that Mindy is the whitest man he's ever met. So they're clearly motivating her. But how will she utilize this motivation? Well, we're going to find out because we're going to cut back to Danny and Cliff getting on the elevator together. And Cliff's going to mention that he heard about the pregnancy and say congratulations. And then just a little dig, he's going to be like, so the baby's yours? And then he's going to try to get in Danny's head by saying that Mindy called him yesterday, which of course he didn't know. And then she just so happens to call him again while they're standing there together. But she's calling him because she's curious if his office is still available. And Cliff's like, my office? Yeah, why? And she's like, because I want it. And when Cliff repeats that, what we hear is Danny saying, what? And the episode ends. It was a solid episode, but let's see how it ranked.
A rank.
So the rankings are ranked the episode based on 5 categories: story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Then I have a laugh counter where I tally up the amount of times the episode made me laugh. 1 point per laugh out loud gets added to the score. But before I dive into the rankings, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. There's not really a story with an arc so much in this one. It's more just following the aftermath of the pregnancy reveal to Danny. Still though, there is a story arc in a way because it's telling the story of how Mindy is going to be finally done with San Francisco and Gurgler, thank God. I gave it a 2.5. So that brings us to acting. I thought the acting was good. I still don't like Gurgler though. It was fun to see Glenn Howerton back and he did still feel like Cliff. Rishi is kind of hit or miss for me. All in all, Mindy and Chris Messina carried the episode and they did well with that. I gave it a 3.5. So that brings us to dialogue, and this is where the episode shines. It's incredibly funny. It felt like a return to great joke writing, the type of writing that we're used to getting with this show, that just hadn't been there since Mindy left for San Francisco. This one made me laugh a lot and had me feeling really positive about the show at the end. So I gave it a 4.75. Now on to episode coherence. This felt very episodic and there was a weird disconnect with Mindy's credit from previous episodes. But it wasn't just previous episodes. I mean, in this episode, the lawyer for Shulman and Associates that's talking to Danny about changing his will is wondering why Danny would put Mindy in his will because Mindy is, quote, terrible with money. So why would she expect that she has a good credit rating? And I know you can say, well, sometimes people think they have a better credit rating than they actually do. And you're not wrong. However, in earlier episodes, this season even, Mindy acknowledged that she has terrible credit. Anyway, it's a moderate plot point, but it's not the biggest thing ever. It feeling more episodic than a coherent episode from beginning to end hits a little harder, but it definitely wasn't incoherent. I gave it a 3.25. So that brings us to character relatability. I think it took a little long for Mindy to come to the conclusion that she shouldn't open a practice with Gurgler. I also think that Gurgler coming around on having the entire financial onus of the practice on him alone was a little too fast. But Danny was very relatable. The team was a little less so, just because it's so hard to buy that everyone would really just believe that Danny is dying. So I went with a 3 on this one. So not huge rankings, not bad rankings, definitely better than they have been in the previous episodes, but a decent laugh counter should definitely keep it in the top 3 tiers. And this wasn't just decent, it was really good. It got me 19 times, which means it puts the grand total of the episode at a 36, which puts it in the Holy Grail. And as for the series average, it goes to a 36.33, which keeps it in the Holy Grail. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your score for this one in the comments. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other Mindy Project ranking episodes or any of my other sitcom ranking or movie ranking episodes on this channel. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. For up-to-date rankings, check out my website at therankpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankpodcast.com. If you really want to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankpodcast, but I will leave you with this. So what happened to Greg's business after marijuana became legal? This is such a bad joke.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, Ja Rule invested and it became Big Murder Inc.
Oh, that's bad.
I just, This episode of the Mindy Project is basically one big fallout from...
Cut!
This episode of
Cut!
the Mindy Project is basically one fallout... Nope.
Cut! Take 3.
This episode of the Mindy Project is basically the fallout from one very big problem. Very big moment. God damn it.
That's okay. Take your time.